Depending on what your specialization is in the E&P value chain, really zero in on exactly where you can provide the most benefit and value and how you can connect with people so that you have that job security. Because honestly, kind of having that sense of where do I want to end up? Am I completely open? Would I be open to being in, California? Would I be open to being in Midland, Texas? It's
Yeah.
there's all sorts of different kind of things you need to consider. Are you open to going international? If so, then you really want to be thinking about what types of companies, because they're tend to be bigger, right? Total, Shell, Equinor. Um,
All right. Welcome to today's podcast on how to get a job. Super excited for today's episode. We're going to be talking about a really, really fascinating industry and how to break into one of the world's biggest industry, and that's oil and gas. And to talk about this particular industry, I have an amazing expert with us today. I have Amanda Rico. She is the owner of Rico Editorial Services, and she's been in this industry for a long time. So uh, when I wanted to talk about this industry, right? Because it's a massive industry that is maybe not talked about as much as it should be, which is an amazing career path. I thought of no one better than Amanda. So Amanda, welcome to the show. How are you doing? Thank you so much for being here.
yeah, yeah. Thanks, Daniel. No, I appreciate you inviting me. And yeah, I mean, oil and gas is definitely a huge industry, big sector, a lot of different intersections between other industries as well. And the sector is diversifying and creating new webs. Especially in the past few years, kind of here since COVID. So I think it's a really relevant topic.
So look, I'm interested to know what got you hooked into this industry, right? This is you've been doing it not for a year, for 2 years, for a long time. So maybe tell us a little bit more about you. Kind of like your origin story on how you became a resume writer, cover letter, like career coach expert in this amazing industry.
Yeah, definitely. So my background is as an English nerd. So I come from the space of being in, English teaching, writing. I have my bachelor's, master's, and PhD all in English, University of Oklahoma and Texas A&M. And so I taught resume writing for a long time. And there was a very specific way that we were taught to teach. And the more that I started realizing that it wasn't exactly the same in real life as I was teaching in tech writing to my students, the more that I thought, no, I should probably kind of diversify this teaching and broaden it out and actually work with clients to be able to help them. So, oil and gas, I kind of fell into that because my husband was a petroleum engineer at University of Oklahoma. So I still remember him asking me if he could get my help on writing a paper on diamond drill bits. So I remember reading about that and being like, what is this thing? And so, yeah, the more that I learned, the more that I wanted to know. And eventually, the more that I worked with people on their resumes, cover letters, LinkedIn profiles, the more that I realized that that sector was very unique. The people were very unique, very down to earth, hardworking, really funny. I love oil and gas people. They're very assertive. Kind of their personality meshes well with mine, so I tend to really like working with them. But yeah, that's kind of how I got into it. The intersection between English and then kind of my husband's interest at the time. He was just a guy I was dating. But yeah.
Amazing. I I interview tons of career coaches on this podcast, right? And different niches, different industries, different whether it's level entry careers or senior executives. What I found is that 80% of the job search, whether you're a student right out of college studying STEM, or you are somebody looking to break into the C-suite in consumer packaged goods, right? 80% of the strategies could be very similar, right? You need to have an understanding of clarity where you want to be. You need to focus on networking and visibility. You need to have a resume. You need to interview for the role, whether if it's a level entry role or a CEO, you probably have more interviews the higher you go up, right? And so there's a lot of commonalities on the process that you need to do. But at the same time, there's that 20% that is very, very different. And that's going to be very different on the industry. It's going to be very different on the stage of your career. And so that's like kind of my question to you is like, what do you think is the biggest difference that job seekers don't realize or think about or prepare on when looking to break into the oil and gas industry versus maybe other industries?
Yeah, that's a good question. Oil and gas is a big but tiny sector. So everyone ends up knowing everyone else. There are very few degrees of separation between us. Like for instance, I have around 38,000 followers on LinkedIn, but I have the majority of the oil and gas core in the States in my
Hmm.
connections. Right, so the people that I meet at the American Association of Drilling Engineers events, or all of the top geologists, the people from Society of Petroleum Engineers, all these different organizations, I know a lot of these different people through these connections. And the more that you can connect with connectors and
Hmm.
find those different degrees of separation, the more job security you're going to have. So I always tell, especially students who are just trying to get in the market, take on leadership positions as much as you possibly can in SPE, in AADE, and AAPG, which now it's into a different organization. But depending on what your specialization is in the E&P value chain, really zero in on exactly where you can provide the most benefit and value and how you can connect with people so that you have that job security. Because yeah, it's a sector where you can get a really good reputation or you can get a really bad
Yeah.
reputation. So, yeah.
I think it's interesting because you know, you see that same type of small, even though it's a massive industry, like everyone knows each other, and I experienced the same thing at PepsiCo. Um, I was there for 6 years, right? And it's not a long time, but it's also not a year. And it's really interesting to see all the people that I went because I was part of this management training program. So all these individuals that were all hired at the same time were essentially hired to be the future leaders of the organization. And every year, people will leave for other companies, and they would go leave to go work for competitors, for Procter and Gamble, for Coca Cola, for Nabisco, for Kraft. And then you would see people from Coke come to PepsiCo, and so you start seeing this mingle of web, and everyone ends up knowing each other. And you would go to like a trade show or they would have really big like CPG trade shows, and you would start seeing your old coworkers who are now your competitors but at the same time your friends. And you're right, if you have a bad reputation, it's not going to only affect your career at PepsiCo, it's going to affect your career at the other companies and vice versa. I also remember when I left PepsiCo, and I left PepsiCo not because of I didn't like PepsiCo, I actually loved PepsiCo. I left because I wanted to start my own business. I still remember getting messages from coworkers who were now like directors or managers at Coca-Cola and Nabisco who were like, "Hey, if you ever want to leave, I have a spot on my team that I think you'd be great at." And so like that's like I never applied for the jobs, and they would come like, "You still happy being an entrepreneur? I have a spot on my team that just opened up."
Yeah, job security. Yeah. I mean, I've had a similar, experience kind of trying to get recruited back to some of the positions that I was in, where it's the more that you have that network working for you
Yeah.
on the back end, uh, the better your chances are of staying employed. And I know that sometimes what's difficult is that, especially for new career grads, it can feel really insurmountable. It can feel
Hmm.
like, well, I already need to have that done. I need to already have this in place. How do I even get that? How do I get that far? And that can be especially difficult if someone is international. If there's language barriers, things like that, which we run into a lot in oil and gas. And there are certain companies also that will tend to hire, people who need sponsorship
Yep.
or things like that, more often than usual, like Schlumberger or SLB now. They've changed their name. But yeah, but it all depends on if you want to even be in with a service company or an operator. So there are different environments that you won't know where to start unless you start with networking
Yep.
and unless you start asking relevant questions and having those conversations with people, so that and that comes from volunteering. That comes
Yep.
from volunteering for leadership positions and things like that.
So I'm seeing like a trend on some of your answers that you talk a lot about like networking, being involved in some organizations, like some of the trade organizations, because that's going to allow you to build the relationships. Now, I wonder like how different is that when you're a college student and you're part of the student clubs that extend versus because I also know that you specialize more working on the professionals, executive levels. How does that change as you grow within your career?
Yeah, so that depends on which area. So if someone is private equity level, if someone is high level super majors kind of with Exxon, your networking is going to vary
Hmm.
based off of those things. So you need to know specific players within your space, depending on how high you want to go, what position you want to be in. For instance, if someone wants to be a COO at a private equity, you better get your butt moving. Really getting your name out there and connecting with people in the private equity space in, Dallas, Fort Worth, and San Antonio, and Houston, and Denver, or else people are going to go with the people they know, even if they don't do a good job at it.
Yeah.
So that's where kind of knowing the space that you're in and knowing which level you want to be at is really critical. And even identifying which types of companies would even allow you to get to that level.
Yeah.
So some super majors may cap you out at something like an advisor or a consultant or a subject matter expert, an SME. You want to know that beforehand if that's even a goal for you, if that's something that you need to redirect and maybe go more of the mid-level company route because the
Yeah.
super majors aren't going to be a good option. So there's a lot of wiggle room there to figure out.
I want to kind of explore this a little bit more because when and I'm talking from the perspective of what I know. It's like we all know the big companies, right? The Shells, the Exxons, but that's not the whole industry, right? So what are some other paths? What are some other like if I'm looking to break into oil and tech and maybe I don't feel like I'm too intimidated for the big oil majors, right? What are some other things that I should be looking for? Is there and how do I find these opportunities if I don't recognize some of those brands, right? Like those brands, they're so B2B. Like if I'm, I might not even know they exist, right?
Well, the first thing you want to identify is where you want to be. So I always tell people when I chat with them, you got to work backwards. So you want to reverse engineer the process. So if somebody tells me I have to be in California, then I'm like, you only got a few players there. You're going to want to
Mm,
look up, California Resources Corporation. CRC is going to be probably your biggest bet. You may run into some smaller outfits, some environmental stuff,
hmm.
but don't expect the same salary as oil and gas, right? Other people, if they say, I have to stay in Denver, like, okay, good luck. But, right. So oil and gas is very, what I'm trying to get at is that oil and gas is very centralized in specific areas or regions within the US.
Yep.
So your best bet is always going to be Houston,
Yep.
100%. If you're not in Houston or you're not open to relocating to Houston, you really need to consider, or reconsider oil and gas.
Yeah.
um, you know, Dallas Fort Worth, that's kind of the mecca of private equity.
Hmm.
For people that want to get into that, people who are in the land space or people who are reservoir engineers or production, they tend to be used really, really well in the private equity space in Dallas. Um, so honestly, kind of having that sense of where do I want to end up? Am I completely open? Would I be open to
Hmm.
being in, California? Would I be open to being in Midland, Texas?
Yeah.
There's all sorts of different kind of things you need to consider. Are you open to going international? If so, then you really want to be thinking about what types of companies because they tend to be bigger, right? Total, Shell, Equinor. There are a lot of other ones, but those are some of the bigs that are multinational
Yeah.
companies. Not even including the service companies like Schlumberger or Halliburton. So it's important to kind of identify those things right up front and say, and that comes with having conversations,
Yeah.
right? So you won't really know those things unless you have conversations and you put yourself in the middle of those conversations to just ask.
Yeah.
Hey, I see you've been with Marathon. What was it like at Marathon? Hey, I seen that you've been with Occidental or Oxy. What was your experience like at that company? Um, I think that a lot of new grads have a very vague idea of what it's going to be like to work at an Exxon or work at, a specific type of company. And whenever they get in, it can be a little bit of an eye opener,
Yep.
for them to kind of realize that, oh, maybe this is more bureaucratic than I had wanted. Maybe I should have gone, a mid-level company route. Um, and sometimes it does come down to just getting that opportunity, that first opportunity. You get it under your belt and then you move on. So it's honestly how much strategy you want to put into it. It depends on the person.
Yeah. One thing I like you focus a lot and you it's talk about resumes and LinkedIn. I want to ask you a question about LinkedIn. Have you seen like a big difference when someone has focuses and uses their LinkedIn, they're active on LinkedIn versus someone who doesn't log into LinkedIn and they're not using it, especially more. And have you seen that change as someone grows in their career as well?
Yeah, 100%. Recruiters think you're really weird if you don't have a LinkedIn. So if you don't have a LinkedIn, get on that. Um, since COVID, things have changed. So if you would have asked me, 5, 7 years ago, if LinkedIn was a big deal, I would have said, well, yeah, you probably need to have a profile, but it wouldn't have been to the level that I do now.
Yeah,
So now you have to have a LinkedIn, it has to be built out. And the reason for that is because whenever COVID hit, recruiters didn't really have the opportunity to go out and necessarily, be going to all the events and meeting people. So many people were losing their jobs, getting laid off, furloughed, that they all piled onto LinkedIn. They all got higher level degrees, certifications. They all started optimizing their, building out their profiles. So this is the state of the market now.
yeah,
This is who you're competing with, is a lot of people who have upped the ante to be way more competitive. So the less competitive you are on LinkedIn, the more competitive someone else seems.
yeah.
So it's honestly much more about just being competitive on the market to make sure that you have a fully built out resume, cover letter, LinkedIn profile. So you come across as a whole package when someone finds.
Absolutely. I think what's interesting is like how LinkedIn has evolved throughout the years from you only use LinkedIn when you're looking for a job. And I think like if I would have been caught using LinkedIn in 2013, my boss would automatically think I'm looking for a job. While now today, I think if I'm working the same corporate America job and my boss sees that I'm on LinkedIn, he might actually think like he might not be as where he might say he's just looking for being up to date with what's going on in the business world. And I think that's something that's LinkedIn done really well. And I think that happens in 2016 when Microsoft acquired LinkedIn and said, okay, how do how do we make this platform the number one social media for work and own the work? Because I just think that's what Microsoft's overall strategy is. And I think it's really interesting because at least what I'm seeing this trend is LinkedIn has always been covering your digital resume, but to me, I do think eventually it will be your resume. And the reason why I say that is because, and I would love your thoughts on this because I know you've been on this platform for a long time and you're like a top 1% creator is, you know, most people lie or exaggerate on their resume, right? And it's if you depending on what statistic or study you look at, it's between 75 to 85%, which is everyone pretty much, right?
Yeah.
And that's why I think LinkedIn can solve some of that, right? Because you you're a lot more likely to lie or exaggerate when you're creating a document, a resume, and you're applying it. It's only seen privately. But when you show on your profile, I can't no longer say that I managed 20 employees when the reality was 10, because if I put that on my LinkedIn profile, people who I did work with can actually kind of call me out. And also, like LinkedIn is now confirming that you work there through your work email, right? They're also saying you can say, hey, I'm proficient in Microsoft Excel as an example,
Yeah.
right?
Do you have the skills? Yeah. Do you have actually that skill
Do you
certification? Yeah.
actually do? But now you can go on LinkedIn learning and take some assessments that actually prove that you know those skills. Now, whether you took that assessment or not, that's a different argument. But the idea is that it becomes that your LinkedIn profile becomes a more truthful version of your resume. And I think that's why LinkedIn bought lynda.com and is you're able to upskill yourself in the platform and get all those certifications underneath, get recommendations. So now you can have recommendations from your previous boss and managers on your LinkedIn profile. Um, so I just find it really interesting on how and I don't know that it will replace the resume in the next year or so. I think it's just a long term thing. But I do see LinkedIn being incorporated to a lot of the applicant tracking systems, right? Like easy apply button, and then that the applicant tracking system just gets all the information that it needs, so it makes it more efficient. But what have you seen in your end?
Yeah, so what I've seen is a combination of both. I have seen the easy apply button being helpful in some situations, but I think the challenge um, with LinkedIn taking over the document itself, or a
Mhm.
resume document, is that that document tends to need to be tailored for each
Yep.
job. So if you
Mhm.
only have one, you know,
Yeah.
LinkedIn resume, doesn't do you a whole lot of favors whenever you're applying to
Hmm.
different roles. So I run into this a lot with oil and gas pros where they'll have a combination of operations, business development, and sales experience, for example. Well, that document needs to be tailored based off of the different specific roles that they're applying for. Maybe one is more ops heavy, maybe another's more business development heavy. That's a different resume,
Yep.
right? So I do see it as problematic for if things were to go the route where it's only a LinkedIn resume. And from what I've heard from recruiters, I think we're a long way away from
Hmm.
having just a online resume. I think that there was a lot of buzz about having an online resume for a long time, and the recruiters kept going, nope, 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 like because they already use ATSs,
Yep.
they already use tracking systems. It's not really a problem for them to just scan the document that's uploaded.
Yep.
Um, I do think that there's other ways that the HR process is trying to be optimized, like using HireVue or things like that, which I think have their own problems and their own challenges. But I think that overall, I think we're still a ways away from seeing just a digital resume kind of taking over the document itself.
Yeah. No, it makes sense. I think like that the biggest, I would say like the biggest argument on that is like, yes, like your LinkedIn profile, you're not going to edit it every single day to, and you're applying to multiple companies at the same time, and that you might have different versions of your resume to highlight different experiences or things that you've done that are more like that you're going to be more likely to be doing in the role that you're applying to. So that totally makes sense. In terms of resume, like tell me a little bit more about like how should I like job seekers be looking at your resume? How often should you be customizing your resume? Is it per role? Is it like is it per company, per role? And what are some advice on customizing your resume as well?
Yeah, so it is per role. You definitely want to be identifying your top strengths for that specific role and really zeroing in on a target for whatever that title is. So I always suggest whenever people are looking at job descriptions, you want to go immediately to the bottom portion that says job requirements.
Mm,
Ignore all that other stuff at first. Don't even pay attention to all that fluff. Go to the very bottom, look at job requirements and see how much you cover. So you want to cover at least 75 to 80% of
hmm.
the requirements, right? So do you require sponsorship? Do you have 10 plus years doing X? Do you have
Yep.
XYZ skills? Do you have Tableau, Python, right? These hard skills that if you don't have them, a lot of times someone else will.
Yep.
And so you're going to be kind of wasting your time doing that. Now, what I have started noticing, and I actually made a post on it last week, I think, was putting out basically a what's going on to all the hiring managers, and I got tons of people respond to it. Um, the job market's really weird right now.
Yep.
So we have a lot of jobs opening up, seemingly a lot of positions for people to be applying to. Companies are back up to hiring. Um, I mean, in oil and gas, we have a little bit of weirdness because we still have things like rigs being laid down. So it's kind of an odd market. But I think that what I was hearing over and over from the recruiters that responded to the post that I made, where it was like, "What's up with hiring right now?" was basically the gist of the post. They all said that employers are looking for unicorn candidates, and whereas before they were looking for maybe 65 to 75% fit,
Yep.
now they're looking for 90% fit, and they think they can get it
Bec-
because there are
mm,
so many candidates on the market.
yeah.
And if they can't find that unicorn candidate, then they just try to find an internal candidate to take on that additional responsibility. So this is the kind of market that we're in right now. um, for those of you who are on the job market and are getting really frustrated with applying
Hmm.
or interviewing to jobs and then not hearing back, this is a lot of what's happening, right? So
Yeah.
I think that during COVID, that showed a lot of employers that they can keep their costs low and just basically overwork their employees.
Yeah.
And if there's an employee that will take on that extra work, then hooray for them. So yeah, I think that's where a lot of this weirdness is coming from.
Yeah.
But yeah, that means you have to be extra competitive.
You talked about looking at the job description and putting the requirements and trying to match 75% or more, right? In this job market, maybe a little bit more. One thing that I've noticed, and I kind of work with my students a lot on, is saying, hey, like all bullet points are not the same. Like if there's 10 bullet points, they're not all 10%, right? it's just like your resume. The most important bullet points to that employer are the ones on the top, right? And just like the most important information on your resume are the ones at the top. Um, and so like I always tell my mentees is like saying like, hey, like those top three, it's the 80-20 rules. Like, what are the top three skills that they're looking for and making sure that's what you have. Like, it's not just like, okay, you have the seven bottom skills, so then you're going to apply. No, I think you need to have two of the three, if not three of the top skills, to be competitive in this job market.
Yeah. I always see, it's very common for me to see kind of early grads, or early career people kind of prioritizing I have great communication skills, or I have,
Yeah.
kind of the bottom rung of things that aren't really going to be as relevant, right? Of course, they want you to have
Yeah.
communication skills, but that's more generic than having Tableau and
Mm-hmm.
Python and right. So you're right. What ends up happening with a lot of job descriptions is that HR pros are reusing that job description.
Yep.
So they're basically keeping that bottom rung of bullet points the
Mm-hmm.
same. They're not changing that.
Yep.
They're changing the top,
Yep.
3 to 5
Yep.
bullet points. And they're definitely changing the job requirement section
Yep.
to make sure that they're meeting whatever that employer wants for them.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where, and exactly with resumes, top fourth portion.
Yep.
If you don't have a ton of quantifiable data in your top fourth portion where you are showing, not just telling,
Yeah.
not just using a whole bunch of words, but you are showing them through examples what you've done for that specific role to fit, it's going to be less likely you get an interview.
No, absolutely. Look, Amanda, this is awesome. I kind of want to give you the opportunity. If people are listening to this podcast and they're either in the oil and gas, how, can you tell us a little bit more about the services you provide and how can someone listen to this connect with you and learn more about what you do?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, I run my own business, Rico Editorial Services. I specialize in, resume, cover letter, LinkedIn building. I also do career strategy sessions. I tend to specialize in working with people who are in oil, gas, and energy specifically because I know that sector the
Yep.
best. So people who are trying to career transition either into oil and gas or out of oil and gas, or people who are trying to move up in the space. I work with them on interviewing and networking, and I really tailor it based off the client. Um, but yeah, the best way to find me is either through email or through LinkedIn. And on LinkedIn, I'm Amanda Rico, PhD, with the periods in the right spots. And I'm sure that Daniel, you can
Yep.
also probably share that so that they can have the
I
right
will.
links from me. But yeah, I tend to I check my messages every day on LinkedIn. And yeah, I'm always open to new connections and chatting with people.
Amazing. No, Amanda, thank you so much. Look, if you guys are listening to this, if you are interested in this amazing industry of oil and gas, just highly recommend connecting and following Amanda on LinkedIn. I'm going to definitely put Amanda's LinkedIn profile link here so you guys can connect with her. And if you're interested in learning more about her services, definitely message her on LinkedIn. I think that's like the easiest kind of way. Um, and Amanda, thank you so much. Look, guys, if you're listening to this, if you know someone that is interested in the oil and gas, share this episode. And if you gain value at all, we don't run ads in this podcast. So please like and subscribe. That's the best way for us to continue to grow and build this platform together. So thank you all for listening so much. Amanda, thank you for being here and catch you guys
My
on
pleasure.
the next episode.